Ladies and gentlemen, we must commence by looking back at history to truly grasp the gravity of what is transpiring today, not through the lens of sensationalist headlines, but through the eyes of those who have sat in the Situation Room when the world stood on the precipice. Throughout the entirety of the Cold War, Greenland was not merely a colossal iceberg floating in the North Atlantic, as many might misconceive. Rather, it was the United States' vital forward defensive line, home to Thule Air Base, the Sentinel Eye monitoring every ballistic missile that could be launched from the other side of the hemisphere. When I served at the CIA or later at the Pentagon, we never viewed Greenland as a piece of real estate to be bought and sold, but as an irreplaceable strategic asset within the global security architecture. However, recent reports that the president has doubled down on threats to acquire the territory, stating the U.S. will intervene whether they like it or not, indicate a disturbing shift from strategic thinking to purely transactional thinking. Comparing national sovereignty to a real estate deal is not only diplomatic naivety, but also a dangerous gamble that threatens to erode the very military alliance we have painstakingly built over 70 years. We must acknowledge the harsh reality that in the 21st century, one cannot simply arrive with cash to purchase another nation's territory, especially when 85% of that population has flatly rejected the idea. The core issue here is not that the United States' desire to control Greenland is wrong, but that the manner in which we are approaching it is clumsy and coercive. I share the White House's deep concern that Russia and China are increasingly expanding their influence in the Arctic, a region becoming a new geopolitical hotspot as ice melts and new shipping lanes open up. Allowing Beijing or Moscow to establish a military or economic presence right on America's flank is a nightmare scenario that any Secretary of Defense must prevent. However, when the president justifies his comments to oil and gas executives by saying, we will do this either the nice way or the more difficult way, he is inadvertently pushing Denmark, one of our most loyal allies in NATO, into a position of confrontation. We need Greenland as a strategic partner within the NATO framework, not as a seized colony. Threats of intervention only serve to further alienate the Greenlandic people and the Danish government. And ironically, this very division opens the fissures that Russia and China are eager to exploit. If we behave like a bully towards our own allies, with what moral authority can we rally the world against the expansionism of rival powers? The danger of this mindset extends to the very security structure of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, as the exchange of words between Washington and Copenhagen has moved beyond land disputes to touch the foundation of strategic trust. The Danish Prime Minister was correct to warn that U.S. attack or coercive intervention in Greenland would mean the end of NATO and the post-Second World War security order. Meanwhile, I hear claims from the president that if it were not for him, you would not have a NATO right now, a statement that excessively personalizes a sacred collective security commitment. While it is true that the U.S. contributes the majority of the budget, NATO's strength lies in unity and the mutual defense commitment of Article 5, not in a security guard company operating under a service contract. When polling shows that only 7% of Americans support the idea of a U.S. military invasion of the territory, we see a clear disconnect between leadership ambitions and the will of the people. A sustainable foreign policy must be grounded in domestic support and international respect, yet currently, we risk losing both for the sake of unrealistic territorial ambition and a heavy-handed diplomatic method. Beyond the Arctic, the instability in the U.S. approach is visibly manifesting in the Middle East, where impulsive threats could ignite a full-scale war without an exit strategy. Recent warnings to Iran, stating that the U.S. will start shooting if the regime uses violence against protesters, are a prime example of drawing red lines without a careful calculation of the consequences. In intelligence and military thinking, We are always taught never to issue a threat you are not ready or able to execute to the end, because when the adversary calls your bluff, the superpower's credibility collapses. Threatening to hit Iran very hard where it hurts sounds forceful, but it places the United States in a reactive position dictated by the internal developments of a hostile nation. If a protester falls and we do not fire, we will be seen as a paper tiger. But if we do open fire, we will be dragged into a new armed conflict in the Middle East precisely when our strategic focus needs to pivot to the Indian and Pacific Oceans. Toughness is necessary, but it must be accompanied by cold calculation, not emotional outbursts. Looking broader, we are witnessing a concerning pattern of behavior from unilateral recognition of territories to surprise military actions like the attack on Venezuela and the capture of President Nicolas Maduro, and now ultimatums issued to Denmark and Iran. From the perspective of an intelligence analyst, I do not see this necessarily as a madman theory designed to confuse adversaries, as some might argue in defense, but rather as the absence of a disciplined and systematic national security decision making process. When foreign policy is conducted based on momentary impulses rather than systematic risk assessments, we do not just confuse our enemies, we terrify our allies. Russia and China do not need to defeat us on the battlefield. They merely need to stand back and watch us dismantle our own alliances and bog ourselves down in unnecessary military adventures. To counter the rise of competing powers, the United States needs stability, consistency, and wisdom. We need to return to prudent realism, where every action is weighed on the scale of long-term national interest, not to not to satisfy an ego or generate the hot news cycle of the day. The solution to the Greenland problem is actually not overly complex if we strip away the political noise and focus on the substance, which is ensuring Arctic security. Instead of attempting to buy the island outright and insulting the national pride of the Danes, the United States should propose a strategic infrastructure investment package and upgrade defense agreements, ensuring that Greenland has sufficient economic resources to reject overtures from Beijing without needing to sell itself. We need to increase our military presence, but under the banner of NATO cooperation, transforming Greenland into a joint bastion of the West rather than a private asset of America. Regarding Iran, instead of public threats to open fire aired in the media, we need to send implicit but clear messages through diplomatic and intelligence channels while coordinating with allies to increase economic pressure, forcing the regime to recalculate the cost of its behavior. The true strength of a superpower lies not in speaking loudly, but in the ability to shape the adversary's behavior without firing a shot. That is the pinnacle of strategic art. Finally, I must remind you that every decision from the Oval Office carries the weight of human lives and national destiny. It cannot be made capriciously. When we speak of intervening in Greenland or shooting at Iran, we are speaking of sending young soldiers into harm's way, expending billions of dollars in taxpayer money, and of reshaping the world order our children will inherit. History will not judge us by bombastic declarations or fanciful territorial ambitions, but by our ability to maintain peace and protect core national interests most wisely. America's greatness does not need to be affirmed by acquiring more land or threatening allies. It is affirmed by responsible leadership, steadfast adherence to principle, and the ability to rally the free world to our side. It is time we reduce the shock value rhetoric and return to the serious, quiet, but effective work of statecraft in a world full of volatility and danger. We must understand clearly that respect on the international stage is not something that can be bought with money or demanded through intimidation. It is built upon trust and consistency in action. When Denmark, a small but proud nation, dares to stand up and say no to the unreasonable demands of a superpower, they are not only protecting their sovereignty, but are also reminding us of the values that the United States once championed. If we continue on this path of unilateralism and imposition, we will soon find ourselves lonely at the pinnacle of power, and that is the most dangerous position for any nation. A strong America is an America that knows how to listen, knows how to cooperate, and knows how to use its power with restraint and righteousness. Let the diplomats do their work. Let the military generals provide objective assessments, and let reason lead the way instead of emotion. Only then can we ensure security for Greenland, deter the ambitions of Iran, and maintain the United States' global leadership position for decades to come. In the context of escalating tensions with Iran, we must also be extremely cautious not to fall into a provocation trap that the adversary may be setting. The history of conflicts in the Middle East has taught us that starting a war is easy, but ending it is incredibly difficult and costly. Public threats to fire back may satisfy the need to project strength in the short term, but they strip away the necessary flexibility in crisis management. If Iran truly wants to drag the United States into a conflict to unite their fracturing internal front, then bellicose statements from Washington are exactly the fuel they require. Instead, we should focus on fortifying defensive systems for partners in the region, enhancing intelligence operations to thwart attack plots before they occur, and maintaining a credible but quiet deterrence. The silent, imposing presence of an aircraft carrier moving into position often holds far greater deterrent effect than 1,000 threats on social media. Returning to the Arctic issue, we cannot deny that climate change is altering the global geopolitical map faster than political institutions can adapt. The melting ice, opening new shipping routes, and access to untapped natural resources is turning this region into a grand chessboard between great powers. Russia has quickly reactivated Soviet era military bases and deployed modern icebreaker fleets, while China declares itself a near Arctic state to seek a foothold. In this context, the presence of the United States in Greenland is a mandatory imperative, but the form of that presence must be sophisticated and modern, surpassing the colonial mindset of the 19th century. We need a comprehensive Arctic strategy encompassing diplomacy, science, economics, and military affairs, built on the foundation of respect for international law and the sovereignty of nations in the region. Only a multilateral and rules based approach can effectively halt the unprincipled expansion of competitive rivals. And ultimately, I want to speak to the responsibility of a leader toward the truth, no matter how hard that truth is to hear. Claiming that the U.S. will intervene in Greenland whether they like it or not, or asserting that NATO exists solely thanks to one individual, are statements detached from reality that damage national interests. The American people deserve to know that the world is far more complex than campaign slogans, and that their security depends on a durable network of allies, not on isolation. We are living in an era where misinformation and populism are eroding the foundations of democratic societies, and the duty of policymakers is to maintain a cool head and a burning heart for the common good. Look straight into the eyes of the soldiers standing watch at Thule or in the Persian Gulf. They do not need hollow promises or futile verbal wars. They need a clear strategy, constitutional orders, and leadership worthy of their sacrifice.